Hi, and welcome back to our study group discussing Peter Adamson's A History of Philosophy without any gaps, especially the Indian sub-series. We're doing episodes 10 and 12 today, and with me, Rogério Marques, Graham Pong, and Zara Spake. Welcome back, guys.
Good to be here.
Great to have another session.
Okay, so let's move on to the visual aids. I think you meant 10 to 12.
10 to 12,
11,
yes.
and 12. Okay, so we are going to delve a bit more into Buddhism, check on Chanakya, or as is known by Peter Adamson's podcast, Kautilya, the author of the Arthashastra, which is an unusual political treatise because we look at Indian philosophy and there was at least until now almost nothing political about it, almost all ethical and metaphysical, so and also cosmological and ontological, but very few political. So let's delve into this. So starting with Buddhism, I'll try to do a tour with you guys into Buddhism so as to we all live here a bit more less reliant on what the popular idea of Buddhism is, which is wrong for practically almost any tradition there is from ancient times, like Stoicism, skepticism, Epicureanism, Confucianism. Pretty much every popular notion that there are of these traditions is wrong, because people espousing ideas about these texts didn't even take the trouble to read the foundational texts of these traditions before forming their opinions of them, which is a grievous insult to human legacy and our culture and tradition, in my mind. And so I at least for Buddhism, I'll try to do my best. So a little glossary here to give ourselves a base here to stand on when we look at Buddhist texts and whatnot. So Anantarika Kama is basically descriptive of the most serious sins in Buddhism that create so much karmic strength that they bring immediate disaster and at death. Then there is the description of what they call monastics. So males are bhikkhus and females are bhikkhunis. Then there is the concept that we already went through. Dukkha depends. The meaning depends on the context. May refer to suffering, or more specifically to the unsatisfactoriness or unease of mundane life. Then there is Tathagata, which is the word that Siddhartha actually called himself Tathagata, as according to the Pali Canon. Then there is Sada or Sraddha. Mind you that all the words here are Pali first and Sanskrit second. Faith that arises from understanding or wisdom, which contrasts a lot with the most common notion we have of faith, as in blind faith, as people taking a step into the unknown without understanding or without checking or judging by themselves. Then there is words that are relevant pretty much to any religion, and the emphasis on these words like Sada, Virya, and Punya are relevant to how the religion is conducted. So Virya is the diligence, energy, enthusiasm, or effort. It's the related to pretty much the rituals, the reverence in which people in a religion are engaging with the rituals, or pretty much any tradition, really. And then there's punya, merit or good karma, wisdom. So this is the part that is essential to regulate the other two. Then there is the non-personal God of Buddhism, Patika Samuppada, which means codependent origination or dependent origination. So, Graham, this word that you would love so much that the Greeks would have becoming, and so here we have among the Buddhist tradition. Then Sangha, Buddhist monastic community, Shakyamuni, So it's another word for Siddhartha Gautama as Buddha, sage of the Shakyas, which is his ethnicity. Then there is the glossary related to the three main branches. This is a simplification of the divisions of Buddhism. So Mahayana means esoteric teachings or great vehicle. It literally means great vehicle, and consists of esoteric teachings. Predominant in East Asia and includes Zen and Pure Land school. Then there is Theravada, exoteric teachings, also called teachings of the elders. So more southern Buddhism, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. Then the Vajrayana is tantric Buddhism, also esoteric Buddhism, and more related to Tibet. Then, so there's the story that was relayed by Peter Adamson, the idea that the teachings should not be kind of glorified or put on a pedestal. Rather, they should be used pretty much like the organon of Aristotle, as a tool for some means. The means is achieving enlightenment or nirvana or whatnot, and after that these teachings should be probably discarded, and probably something else is relevant. And so this idea of a person metaphorically traversing from a shore of chaos to traversing the river that's related to acquiring enlightenment or acquiring wisdom and self-control, to the other shore where there is a peace and calm and tranquility, equanimity of mind. And afterwards, the parable describes the person as kind of foolish. They are attached to their raft, and so they go with the raft to dry land, attached to it, which is kind of ridiculous. Then there is the teaching of Buddhist teachings as a poisonous snake, which is a really good opportunity to show that a touch point between East and West, you'll see. So quoting the Bhattacharya, instead they learn the Dhamma only for the sake of criticizing others and for winning in debates, and they do not experience the good for the sake of which they learn the Dhamma. Those teachings, being wrongly grasped by them, conduce to their harm and suffering for a long time. Why is that? Because of the wrong grasp of those teachings. Suppose a man needing a snake, seeking a snake, wandering in search of a snake, saw a large snake and grasped its coils for its tail. It would turn back on him and bite his hand or his arm or one of his limbs, and because of that he would come to death or deathly suffering. Why is that? Because of his wrong grasp of the snake. So when people grasp a tradition or a doctrine or whatever, and they come from a position of self-centeredness, wanting to outshine others, wanting to stamp on others for their betterment, they will actually figure out ways, even the best traditions and the best doctrines, they will figure out ways and to misuse these teachings, by which will result in harm to themselves. And this text didn't even touch upon that, but harm to others as well. And this is a parallel that I draw between Buddhism and Stoicism. In the words of the slave turned Stoic teacher Epictetus, in his discourses, lecture notes taken from one of his brightest students, Aryan, he said, "Surely there is nothing weightier, nothing truer than these words, in which the greatest of philosophers declare that the writings and teachings of philosophy, when poured into a false and low-lived person, as though into a dirty and defiled vessel, turn, change, are spoiled, and become urine or something, it may be dirtier than urine." So it's pretty much possible. Anyone that comes from a bad place to pick up either Stoicism, Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, or whatnot, and instrumentalize them in a narcissistic or self-centered kind of way. So I'll pause now and let you guys comment or add anything.
Yeah, so yesterday we got to talk a little bit about friendship. So maybe to add to the glossary, Kalyana Mitata, which is a good friend or virtuous friend or noble friend or admirable friend. And in the Pali Canon, some of the oldest texts in Buddha, there's the Upada Sutta, I think. Is that the one you read from yesterday, I guess, or a related one? But anyway, in that one,
Maybe.
there's a conversation between Siddhartha and a disciple, Ananda, in which Ananda enthusiastically declares, "This is half of the holy life, Lord. Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie." And the Buddha replies, "Don't say that, Ananda. Don't say that. Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie is actually the whole of the holy life. When a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and comrades, he can be expected to develop and pursue the Noble Eightfold Path." So that's an aspect of Buddhism.
It's a really nice compliment for us to not just interpret all the Eightfold Path is an individual pursuit and leave it at that.
Yeah, so I've read that the sort of the excessive focus on meditation, and especially sort of private meditation, is a fairly modern advent in Buddhism. So it's a feature of modernized Western Buddhism, with like an extreme emphasis on things like mindfulness meditation, especially, and also an emphasis on mindfulness meditation as opposed to other kinds of meditation, of which there are several. So another one, good term that may go onto the glossary is Brahma Vihara, which is translated as sublime attitudes or abodes of Brahma, or divine abodes of immeasurables or infinite minds. And there are 4 of those. One is Metta, which is quite well known. It's loving kindness. Another one is Karuna, which is less well known, but it's the sympathetic suffering with others, or empathic suffering with others. Then there's also Mudita, which is empathic joy with others, and Upekkha, which is equanimity, or I guess peace of mind, or calmness. There's some other words that refer to calmness. I think Samadhi also refers to calmness. But yeah, so there are specific practices to cultivate the ability to compassionately suffer with others who are suffering, so sort of feel others' suffering as one's own suffering. And also there are exercises to empathically enjoy the joy and success of others. And there are exercises to cultivate warm feelings of affection for others and a desire for their well-being. And there are exercises for cultivating peace of mind and equanimity and that kind of stuff. So those are different kinds of exercises than just the mindfulness stuff that you're likely to run into. Having said that, I think some of the modern additions to Buddhism are quite helpful. I think body scans in particular I found quite useful for just developing sort of embodied emotional self-awareness, like the feeling of emotions as they spread through the whole body, rather than just as I conceptualize them in relation to others and maybe sense them in my posture or facial expressions or whatever. But that was invented by a Western psychiatrist, who was so not an Indian practice at all. I think it was derived from a progressive relaxation technique that was also a Western invention, sort of curling up the toes in a clenching the toes and then releasing the toes, and then clenching the calves and releasing the calves, and tensing the upper legs and releasing the upper legs as a progressive relaxation exercise. And then taking that and just removing the physical clenching of it and just doing an attentional scan of the body, say from the feet to the head, or from the head to the feet.
That looks cannily similar to a practice that I've seen in Sistema, which is from Russia.
Yeah. So developing like bodily awareness to do a purposefully scan one's awareness through the whole body is I think a Western thing. But I stand to be corrected on that. I tried to look up the history, and I saw it on some random YouTube video, and I'm never too sure about the quality of information in random YouTube videos. I know we sometimes get things wrong here. We're kind of random YouTube videos, so like, you never know when another random YouTuber gets things wrong. But yeah, so the Merck mindfulness dojos kind of create an impression that like mindfulness is the be all and end all of Buddhist meditation. Actually, in the episodes, coming back to the episodes, I think in the interview with episode 12, I forget who the interview was with, a very famous Buddhist expert. He also says that there are all kinds of contemplative exercises that fall under the umbrella of meditation. So not just mindfulness meditation. That's quite important to keep in mind.
I was going to say, I have 3 quick thoughts. One is, Rogério, it would probably be a good idea if you did some house cleaning as to what exactly the difference between Sanskrit and Pali is, because I'm sure there are people out there who who don't know, and I'm not versed as well enough in that one to give it a good shot myself. The second one is that I think that those poisonous snakes in ancient Greek, Plato and company would call them sophists.
Yes.
And the last one is, I come from a place that, that picture of the guy with the canoe on his head. My hometown is Akron, Ohio, and we have a statue of an Indian carrying a canoe like that because part of the point is we're one of the highest places, and people would portage their boat from one river to another, where it's the highest point there. So you come up one river from one direction, cross the highest point, and then go down the other one. So I'm sure even the Buddha himself would respect the fact that sometimes it actually is the right idea
Yes.
to pick that boat up and carry it on your head. So tagging on those points.
Yeah, thanks. Very good points. Zara, if you'd
Agreed.
like to.
I had a quick thought about these images of the poisonous snake and the useful raft. So one of the things I'm going to keep in mind while we learn some of these teachings and these lessons is that the difference between a bad vessel and a poisonous snake is it's a very similar idea between Epictetus and what we're talking about here. But a bad vessel sort of has something bad about it that makes the good fluid that's put into it turn bad. Whereas a poisonous snake versus a raft is saying these teachings, potentially, I could be wrong about this, but I'm going to think about it to test the thesis as we learn the teachings, is that the teachings themselves are constructed in such a way so that if you approach them properly, you'll find them a useful vessel for getting somewhere good. But if you approach them the wrong way, there's something in the teaching itself that's venomous that will actually kill the person who's approaching it to use it as a weapon or to use it in the wrong way. So I have no idea if that's the case. I don't know anything about Buddhism, which is why I'm really happy to be here. But I'm going to try to keep that in mind as we go forward and see if it's possible to discern how the teachings could be constructed in a way where they themselves could turn against the person approaching them or be useful to the person approaching them, depending on if you've approached them in the right way.
I'll try to address Graham's points and yours as well. Okay, so in terms of the comparison between Pali and Sanskrit, so Pali is considered a Prakrit language or a Middle Indo-Aryan language. So it developed from Prakrit, which was the language that the Buddha himself spoke in his lifetime. And Pali is not considered a descendant of the Sanskrit language. So it's kind of like a cousin of a Sanskrit or a brother or something like that. While Sanskrit, so it's has been in vogue from the Vedic period, has had a great influence, as we've seen, on religion and literature. And was really an integral part of the cultural tradition, even having the full undivided attention of expert grammarians, even with a sacred duty like Panini. And also Sanskrit is considered an Indo-Aryan language, just like Pali. But Sanskrit is much more the liturgical language of Jainism in Hinduism and also Buddhism. But as for Buddhism, since Buddhism arose outside of Sanskrit at first, There are many texts are in Pali, as well as in Sanskrit. And often when we find words of the Buddhist lexicon, we are presented with both versions. The Wikipedia pages are always presenting Buddhist terms in both languages by convention due to this. I hope I addressed your point, Graham. Feel free to ask any follow-up question.
No, you did far better than I could have ever dreamed of doing. I've learned a lot from that one myself. And the other one is I would only give a quick nod that we don't need to go into is that India gets even more complicated if we go further south and get into the Dravidian languages. So going to tag on that. Oh, I did want to comment on Zara is that I think the point of what the Buddha is saying with teaching is something that I found true in most areas that I learn, where it's like if you learn basketball, when you first start out, you learn your basic drills and things like that. But as you master the game, you learn the times in which to abandon those drills and abandon those rigid rules you're taught, because you develop that intuitive understanding. And I think that's the point, is the teachings are from the books and the rules and all of that one. And if to take that into more of a Christian concept, is the difference between the Word of God, i.e. the Bible, and the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the law. The word of God versus, the Spirit that's written in your heart, the Word of God that's written in your heart. It's intuitive. I think that's kind of where Buddha's getting at, a more general point than any specific Buddhist teaching. So I wanted to just slide that one in real quick. Go ahead, Rogério.
I agree, Graham. I think that, and I also expressed this yesterday, that probably it's related to this concept that I expressed of unconscious mastery. So we become so aligned with whatever it is that there exists that is true, absolutely, in the universe. And the teachings are not true. They are just a model. They are just like a finger pointing at the moon. And so, again, another analogy. So don't focus on the finger. Figure out a way to slide your glance at first from the finger you start, but slide your glance to where the finger is pointing at, and it might be a challenge to stop looking at the finger and traversing the emptiness of the void and looking at the moon. But it's very necessary. It's necessary for us to confront unpleasantness while we are doing this traversal in whatever mountain it is that we are doing this traversal, whether the mountain of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Stoicism, Sufism, Christianity, Islam, whatever. So it's really important to figure out all these traditions are, or if they have merit, they are kind of like fingers pointing more or less or roughly towards the truth. And it's our, if we really resonate with the tradition or traditions that we have adopted, I think it's our duty to figure out a way to little by little align ourselves to what really is there. And if such, the teachings per se might even become an encumbrance, because it's a bit like we are just so adept at boxing, like Rocky Balboa, that we should stop thinking about the techniques and we should start just punching, just punching naturally. And I think this, and Nerdalliun, correct me if I'm wrong, at least my exposure to martial arts had that. So at first we kind of force the stances, we kind of force the techniques, we overdo them, we exaggerate them, so that when we are in a real fight, when we are in a real competition, if we go only to halfway through, we are doing it right, basically. So it's kind of like that, I'd say.
Yeah, you're saying it's an extension of that mastery principle that was being talked about earlier. And I can see how that could be what it is, because it's the difference of the approaches. You're grabbing the snake, which means you're trying to own it and hold on to it, versus seeing the teachings as the thing that get you to something else. So it might be nothing more than that extension of that mastery concept, which you guys
we
are
can
talking about.
also use a more modern parable, which is a smartphone is a device that is super powerful. It's even more powerful than the computers used to manufacture the nuclear bomb, and also to take people to the moon. And so if we use it properly, we can kind of supercharge our education and our self-betterment. But if we misuse them, we are owned by our tools, and we will our dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin systems will be kind of controlled, like we are a puppet being pulled, with our strings being pulled by this device, and whatever algorithms are running with it, or software, or etc. And so it can bite us back, and we can be degraded, and we can even acquire vices and become poisoned by a smartphone, via whatever it is that it is regarding how we use them. So I'd say it could be also an attempt to sort this out, to make sense of this.
Yeah, I don't trust it. I think we should get rid of our smartphones and learn astral projection so that we can all keep meeting like this. But the smartphones are all poison. And we'll figure it out somehow.
Yeah, I want to maybe touch on the poisonous snake idea. I do think there are some things just inherently in the tools that are quite dangerous. I don't know if it's only when people use them to win debates or whatever. I think there are other ways in which they can be dangerous. So I do think the kind of samadhi meditation is the way they describe it is a settling of the waters, or like when there's something stirred up in water over time, it kind of settles. And that metaphor really makes me think of the way it feels to, if one is really still in a comfortable position, how one sort of falls half asleep and falls more deeply asleep. And that kind of hypnagogic state can lead to greater insights, but they can also lead to false insights. And it's a hypnagogic state, so people can get themselves quite deluded by sort of buying into hallucinatory experiences that they're having and believing they've discovered a more fundamental aspect of reality through the superior clarity of mind that they've achieved in their advanced meditative practice or whatever. Meanwhile, they had a kind of crazy dream in a half-dream state and should not have taken that nearly as seriously as they're taking it. And that can feed into things like narcissism. People can take the dreamlike hallucinatory experiences they have in that half-awake sleep and take that as evidence. Oh, I've had a special mystical experience. That means I'm one of the special people who has special knowledge of this other realm. And that feeds into their delusions of grandeur and their entitlement and their abuse of people. And yeah, I think samadhi can directly lead to that.
Yeah. Can I add something to what you're saying there? So Jung called it the confusing yourself with the archetype is one aspect of what you're talking about, I think. One of the things that can help us, I think, to avoid doing that, because one of the ways that people make that mistake, I think, is this. Maybe they have a profound insight, right? There's a psychological shift and they're able to see the world differently. And the error that they're making is that they're then concluding that the empirical or metaphysical comprehension sort of structure that they put on it to make sense out of it must therefore be true, right? So maybe you could approach a good experience like that to get the wisdom without making more of it than you're supposed to make out of it, something like that. Which, keeping in mind like what different experiences and different approaches to revelation can do and what they can't do, rather than confusing them. So for instance, to be more specific, what's a good example? Well, here's a good example. I know there's a person around today who's extremely impressive and wise, and I like a lot of what he's doing. I won't name who it is, but he often talks about the insights he got from psychedelic trips. And then he concludes that he knows a bit more about the wiring behind being than maybe that vision really was telling him. You see what I'm saying? I think that's a picture of what you're talking about. And it could be an error in approach, but it could also just be a cognitive error of saying, well, wait a minute, this means something, and it's something very profound. What would be an example? You can get the profound truth from the mystical revelation without thinking that, the scientists must be wrong, because now the only way I can comprehend this is with these empirical consequences, and they disagree with that. So now I've got a better science than they do, or a better ethics or something. Anyway, I think that's part of the picture of what you're talking about.
I was going to say, I kind of take what you're talking about, Nerdalliun, as, I have that multiple levels of truth, and what's true on one level may not be true on another. And that's a matter of they're taking their insight, which is true on that, hypnagogic level, but they don't test to see how far it extends. They don't sit there and see if that actually holds true, like in the real world, so to speak. And, again, I'm kind of old. So back when I was growing up, special people, they kind of got put onto special buses and taken to a special school to be educated with other special people, because they needed that special help. So, I think that idea of special people is kind of maybe has lost a different meaning in today's world. So tagging on that.
It's really funny.
The elite, the super advanced of mind.
So
diametrical opposite of retarded.
if anyone comes into this space, or if any one of us ever do that mistake, let's just use the code word special. We'll say, wow, it sounds like, if I go down that road, just say, it sounds like a very special insight you have there. I don't know what that means. That's fantastic, Graham.
I also have a personal account on this. So I know a person who is trustworthy. I trust that she's not making this up. I know her character well enough to know that is not the case. And also, if she has narcissism, it's very mild or negligible. And maybe at most is intemperate, like in getting angry in extreme situations. But other than that, a lucid of mind person and a grounded person who, when she meditates, she sees things like what is described in astral projections.
Perfect.
And people meditating like as if in Tibet or something like that, and halls and corridors well decked, very evocative and very vivid. And I even captured her accounts, so I have them stashed. And one day we both will collaborate on figuring out what to do with them. But the thing is, we should not fall into the error of the inference error, the inference fallacy.
Perfect. Exactly.
We cannot infer that since this experience occurred for a single person, that we know the meaning of it, and that meaning relates to how the real world works. That's ludicrous. I think when we experience something out of the ordinary, we shouldn't just go with it and start to make overarching conclusions about the theory of everything or something like that of the universe, based on a data point or two data points. So we need to bring our wisdom from science in that regard as well, and keep cool and keep experimenting, keep figuring things out, of trying to avoid being overwhelmed emotionally by these things. And I think this person does a really good job of kind of not being emotionally overwhelmed and kind of raving uncontrollably by the aftermath of these experiences. So I think it's possible to take things a better and more healthy way.
You know, what's funny about it is that whatever that experience is, it is actually about cosmic truth. It is, if it's not, food poisoning or something maybe, or whatever, but if it is valuable, it is about something important. So it's very tricky. I'm going to tell a story that I never thought I'd tell anybody. So it's of one of the only times that I've had a really weird vision experience in my life. I'll be really quick about it, but it'll illustrate what you're talking about, because when I had this experience, I was actively working on sorting it out and not thinking of it, right? So one of the things to remember is if you're in the realm of mysticism, of direct experience, you don't comprehend it rationally, right? So I'll tell you what happened really briefly. I'm driving very long distances. I used to drive for work all across the country. And I was not sleepy. I wasn't tired. It was 2 or 3 in the morning and I was driving and I was listening to a very intense philosophical debate between 2 popular philosophers. And they were both sort of not seeing each other's point. And I was really having a fun time listening to it. And while I'm driving, I'm able to keep driving. I'm able to keep listening to what's happening. And at the same time, I swear to God, I'm visualizing a completely different realm that seems to have nothing to do with what they're talking about and nothing to do with the road. It was a bizarre experience. And here's how I'll sort it out. Here's how I was sorting it out in the time. There was an entity there that I was in a space, and there was an entity and there was myself. And so I was sort of communing with this entity, and I called the entity the perceiver. Okay. So without describing it too much, it sounded a lot to me like Kenny McKenna's descriptions of astral projection. You take whatever drug they're talking about, and then you're in a realm and there's aliens and you're talking to them and all this crazy, bizarre stuff that they talk about, but they think that it's physically real or literally real. But what I was thinking to myself is, well, it could be, but probably not. It more like seemed to me like what I was doing was simply communing with a subconscious structure in my brain that was sort of a subpersonality that took in data from the rest of the brain and was, that's why I called it the perceiver, because it wasn't sending impulses out to anything else. It was just very calm and had sort of just been there my entire life as this, whatever, it's a homunculus. Now, I'm not saying I know that's what it was either, right? I'm not saying I know it was aliens. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I'm not saying I know it was some Jungian subconscious personality or whatever. And I know this sounds really weird. This is the only time I've ever had an experience like this. But the point is, I didn't grab on to knowledge. I didn't say, I know it's this or I know it's that. I just said, well, what's the point of this experience? And what is it that I'm supposed to get out of this? Which is that there's at least some part of my being that is just calmly kind of watching the movie of my life. And, maybe I need to, whatever it was a part of my subconscious that wasn't afraid of death. It was just extremely peaceful. And it was, getting in touch with that. So in any case, the only reason to tell the story is to say that what you don't want to do in those experiences, say, now I know something about the empirical world or the metaphysical world, or even this psychological subconscious. I was saying it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, but the point of the experience is to have the experience and see if you get any wisdom out of it without thinking that you've grasped, that the idea of grasping the teaching or grasping the snake is where you make the error. And then you think, okay, now I've got a whole worldview. There's these aliens and here's where they are. And this is their realm. And is that you don't know any of that. So we're always trying to make sense of the world. But when you have a mystical experience, and the teachings of the Buddha are a raft, they're designed to get you to a spiritual place. When you're reading them in that way to get to a spiritual enlightenment, constantly refuse to grab, I guess is the idea. Refuse to grab onto it to say,
non-attachment.
I comprehend.
Non-attachment.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah.
No, I can second that one. I was going to sit there and say I tend not to talk a whole lot about my experiences, but in general, I think the right rule is it's fine to play with the snake if you have the experiences with the snake. But don't squeeze the snake. If you squeeze the snake, it's going to bite. That's just how it works. Just don't do it. Okay.
Snake handling etiquette is very important. Also, one thing that I would like to add is people who go really heels deep very quickly into things like Buddhism, Stoicism, and etc. These it's not a coincidence that there is this word therapia that means therapy or self-service or self-care in ancient Greek, and also that this therapy might be bitter, especially at first, and also it might destroy you if you go into fast and too hard into it, because a lot of what Buddhism does, if you practice it really earnestly, especially if you do it too much, especially at the start, you need to gauge your level and adequately correspond to your level in the tradition, how hard and how hardcore you do the practices and study the stuff and think about the aphorisms, which is all these doctrines make you confront your mortality in some way or some form, and other unsavory things of being in a more vivid and more direct way, and even some forms of meditation might disturb people, especially if they aren't veterans at meditating, and instead of meditating for 5 or 10 minutes, they just try to meditate during an hour or 2 hours, and then their brains, I don't know what happens. Maybe they have a spurt of DMT and they see stuff and have like the equivalent of a bad trip in meditative sense. Or people who try to do lucid dreaming and end up having a sleep paralysis, as I had once, and saw what looked like the hooded figure of Thanatos, death, at my feet. And then I went to check around the corner of my room, and there was nothing there. So yeah, people have possibly an inherent capability to either hallucinate from a materialistic perspective by having a spurt of DMT inside their brains, or a connection to something different from the 3D world of Euclidean space in which we are accustomed to see. But having said that, I think we should move on with the slides, guys. What do you think?
No, I think that's really wise what you said. Really quickly, I'll say all of what we're talking about is a really, really, really useful safety rope when going into these sorts of realms, because we're here to do philosophy, and now we're talking about mysticism. And I have a friend who I talk with all the time. He's very quiny, and he doesn't want to talk about this mysticism stuff because he sees all the dangers. The lessons we're all talking about is this is the safety rope that keeps you from those dangers. If you go into that realm and you say, I'm not going to grasp it, I'm not going to conclude that I have a rational, logical, here's the doctrine and I own it now, or here's the truth about an empirical world. If you refuse to do that, that helps you to avoid all of the obvious reasons why you wouldn't want to go into a realm like this, especially people with a philosophical instinct who are trying to stay very grounded. So I think that's really good. Thank you. But yeah, let's go on. Oh.
I'll bring it full circle and sit there and say, when you're dealing with Indian philosophy, I don't think you can help yourself but deal with mysticism and some of these
Yes.
things. So let's plow forward and deal with
That's
some
true.
more.
It's also true of Western philosophy, which we'll talk about one day. I swear to God. Yeah.
Okay, so Buddhism had a story. It started in India, but it didn't stay by any means in India. So it traveled north to Tibet, even to Mongolia, traveled east to China, and even Indonesia and Japan. It traveled south to Sri Lanka. Just to give you guys a really bird's eye view of this thing, which is the tradition of many traditions and different schools and sects and whatnot. Pretty much just like any tradition with the tag of religion on it, like Christianity, and its many sects. And then, well, about the Buddhist texts, it's an understatement to say that there are a lot of them. It's also an understatement to say that a person who commits to reading them all and studying them diligently and well can do so in a lifetime. Probably not. And so just to give you guys a tour. So a tour on the sacred texts. So the Buddhist texts are at a overall view divided in 3 baskets, or as they call it, the Tripitaka. So Pali Canon, more related to India and the original or older form of Buddhism. Then there's the Chinese canon and the Tibetan canon. And as you can see by the coloring, there are pieces of volumes of texts that are shared by at least the Pali and Chinese, and then Tibetan canon is a different thing, a different beast, we could say. Then there's the Vinaya Pitaka, which is the first one of these canons, and so just to give you guys an illustrative idea of what it looks like, the oldest ones that are extant, and then so they subdivide, so they're like codes for monastic discipline. I won't read it all, but just to give you an example. Then it's the first one divides also to Kandaka, which includes account of Buddhas and this principal disciples' awakenings, so kind of like a bit biographical. Kulavaga, so accounts a bit like meeting notes of these councils and establishment of monastic orders. Parivara, so accessory texts, analysis from rules from various points of view. So kind of an Aristotelian-esque way of things, which I could say. Then there is the Sutta Pitaka, the second mass of texts, which is subdivided in these 5. So long discourses, middle length discourses, connected discourses that are related to even commentary, numerical discourses arranged numerically, and then there's a minor collection including sermons, doctrines, and poetry and whatnot. It includes the Dhammapada, which I will quote a few excerpts in following slides. Then there is the Abhidhamma, which includes detailed scholastic presentations of doctrinal material, so a bit more hardcore philosophy-esque kind of thing. And there are even Buddhist texts with hardcore materialistic science and astronomy and whatnot. And then there is the Tripitaka Koreana, early edition of the Chinese Buddhist Korean. As you can see, there is a lot of it. And then there's the Chinese canon, which included in the Tripitaka, besides the first 2 volumes, additional sections, so subdivided in Madhyamaka, which has to do with texts by Nagarjuna, who we will approach in later sessions, and Satasastra. Then there is Chinese commentary, so Chinese musings on Buddhism, histories and biographies, encyclopedias, etc. They even document stuff about other religions like Hindu, Manichaean, Nestorian, Christian. Then Chinese canons, 64 texts in 3 volumes. Then the extant Buddhist schools. So as we've seen, Mahayana, Theravada, and Vajrayana. Buddhist in China, it's another thing completely. So 10 extant schools. I won't go into all of them, but they each differ, especially by their emphasis, pretty much like the Christians do, by their emphasis on different portions of scripture. Then, as we've mentioned in the previous session, the difference between lasting happiness and fleeting happiness has a bit to do with how we direct our ambitions, either outwardly to stuff that we cannot control, or inwardly by internalizing the goals of our lives and aligning them more with what we can consider our individual life's purpose, which is a blessing for each individual who can claim they found it, and a source of much joy, and especially enduring joy. Then we can go into a bit more detail with life purpose, aka Dharma, which is really what I just glanced at, and means of livelihood, which, to be fair, are what sustains us. It's the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food that we eat. But we should not make our lives revolve around fluids that we drink, as in alcoholism, or foods that we eat, as in obesity, anorexia, bulimia, and many other what we call pathologies related to stuff that should be our nourishment, our sustenance, or other things like instead of just enjoyment with others, kind of like betting on games of chance to a point in which we lose our livelihood. And then, so to contrast this, if we really are engaging in our dharma or dhamma or svadhamma, as comes from the Sanskrit vocabulary, if we are really engaging in it on a daily basis, then we have we earn, or we yield from it, a baseline level of joy and happiness that, although the surface might vary with the economy, with job or not job, people at our job dealing with us properly or respectively or disrespectively, and etc. This is just a surface change of the level of happiness. We have a happiness stash, or a happiness tank that is with us at all times, that helps us have a nice level of stability, of mental stability. It might even avoid us being triggered as being angry at things. We might instead even derive some humor from stuff that goes against plan, that for many people that are not engaged with a life purpose, they might be triggered beyond control and be possessed by anger for a while, and do stuff even that they cannot go, that's irreversible. While if a person has all this happiness tank with them, they might have an additional tool beyond other tools of producing equanimity or magnanimity for a person to keep a steady mind. And so if we engage with Dhamma, we can have a fulfilling satisfaction, a complete, and feelings of complete safety, because we attain something that cannot be taken from us, not from others or from the doings of the world. While on the other side, I think we are much more acquainted with the right side of the stable. Then, so let's see. So this is a quintessential Buddhist kind of way of thinking, espoused by Mr. Chow in the Hangover series. So a guy, one of those guys are complaining that their day went bad and something went wrong, they were shot at and whatnot, and so Mr. Chow replies, "Oh, you're having a bad day, but did you die?" And he even repeats it, so he drives the nail further, so that they might find, or they might have a chance at finding reason to be grateful for things not having gone even worse than they've went. So it's always really useful to find ways to engage healthily with the worst things that can happen. And if they don't, we have so many reasons for joy and gratitude. And perhaps it's better to pause here and let you guys speak your minds.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have much to add to that.
Yeah, good job. Thanks for the intro. That was a lot of text.
I'm kind of in the same
Yeah.
place. You did a great job.
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming. Even if we go to the Christian Bible and we say we want the full unabridged Bible, it's a thing that rises probably up to my navel or shoulder or whatnot, all piled up. So it's a lot of stuff. Each tradition has a lot of material. Yeah, go ahead, Zara.
That's before the commentators. What we're going to do in this series, we're going to read every one of those books, right? Just word
Yes.
for word and add it in.
Yeah, well, art is long, life is short. That's what they say. It's true for medicine. It's true for philosophy. It's true for religious traditions. It's true for mysticism, and so.
Luckily for us, this thing is bottomless that we're studying, so we'll never get bored and we'll never find the end and we'll never grasp the snake, which we shouldn't be trying to do anyway.
Yeah.
I was going to say that library shows why the Chinese invented printing hundreds of years before Gutenberg.
Yes, probably it's a really kind of spiked them, prodded them to
that's
develop.
actually a thing. I think the earliest printed works were Buddhist texts. Let's see.
Oh no, they absolutely were. I wasn't making that up. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Awesome. I didn't know that. So a great point to complement all this. Okay, so let's stretch forward.
Typical Buddhists being too lazy to do any work, wanting to meditate all day, so they invent printing so that they can get the text done earlier and quicker.
Yes. So let's see, Buddhist way of life. So this is kind of like my kind of critique of Adamson and Ganeri. So yeah, poor guys. They had so much material to go through. They really needed to go really quickly over Buddhism. So the common human of our day in the so-called developed nations commits the serious mistake of only thinking about death and mortality when it invariably and inevitably comes either to people around them or to themselves. Death is on the back burner for the privileged people of the 21st century. Notice that I left the people who live in countries with severe infectious diseases, who see people dying like during childhood, infant mortality levels skyrocketing compared to what we know. And so, yeah, we can't say this applies to every single person on Earth, but for the elite of the world, literally, we are the equivalent of the Kshatriyas, if we kind of transpose the overwhelming opportunity and wealth and access to the internet and stuff that we can do, in contrast to the less favored people in the world that see death on a daily basis. We should take a hint from these traditions as well, because they say that good times creates people with really bad characters. And so even if we do have good times, we should kind of artificially experience hardship. We should engage in self-discipline, that we should engage in sweating in times of peace, so as to prevent us from bleeding so much in times of war, in a metaphorical sense. So crisis comes like pandemics and what the hell. So yeah.
So can I now raise a critique of Buddhism in general that I think I've probably raised a couple of times before? But if it makes sense to discipline oneself by sort of a little bit of self-inflicted pain or whatever, does it make sense to completely swear off anger just because it causes one suffering? Saying, well, yeah, maybe, if self-inflicted suffering makes sense for the sake of the discipline that it inculcates and sort of the resilience it builds, maybe there's a place in life for the kind of suffering that's associated with pain, and even with the pain of fear of death or whatever. Because the Buddha encouraged people to contemplate their death, and presumably they would suffer some fear as a result of that. If you really do a very vivid imagination of yourself dying, if you say, all right, let's take one way in which I could die, and you like really picture it in full detail, chances are your heart rate will go up and you'll have a very uncomfortable experience of that. A sort of deliberate suffering to a certain point. And like one of the common criticisms of Buddhism is like any sort of deliberate suffering is eventually pointed by the Buddha to individual liberation, to like my liberation. Why can't we say like maybe we should? Yesterday we talked a little bit about this. Maybe endure some suffering for the sake of others' benefit. So like maybe righteous indignation motivates police officers and lawyers, and maybe sort of fear and worry motivates doctors to do things that are good for others, even if it puts their own well-being in some amount of peril. Like a lot of doctors work crazy hours that are kind of bad for their health, and maybe shorten their lives by a certain amount, and maybe they would have been happier sort of meditating more and taking it easier and cultivating peace of mind, but they end up saving a lot of lives of other people and helping other people raise children in a family that otherwise wouldn't have benefited from that. So
I think that's correct. I think that's right. I wonder if the Buddhist teaching isn't the idea of saying contemplate these unpleasant things until they're no longer your master but your slave. You know, like I think you're right that there's an appropriate way of using these things, that when the Buddhists are describing what's bad about them, they're describing the fact that they own you, like the rage owns you and the fear owns you. And maybe the point of approaching and looking at that thing is so that you can bring it down to a level where it's not owning you anymore. If that's not their teaching, I think you're correct that, and they're wrong, that there is an appropriate place for these things. But I wonder if that's why the focus on it in the first place is that it won't control you.
But my understanding of it, and it may be incorrect because I'm fairly ignorant of Buddhism, but my understanding of it is that things like fear and grief and anger are variously characterized as a kind of ignorance, a foolishness, or a disease that you need to enlighten yourself of cure yourself of, and that the like divine abodes, the metta, I guess it does include grief. So there's something holy for them about grieving with someone else. But I don't think in at least Indian Buddhism there's anything holy about, or just a possibility of anything righteous or holy or good about anger, or holy or righteous or good about fear.
It's the same for Stoicism and cynicism. They don't hold anger in any regard. They completely disregard it, and it equates to the Spartan discipline, the school of Stilpo in Megara. Stilpo also was said to be immune to all evil after conquering alcoholism and other problems of intemperateness. But it's you need to pay the price, literally. You need to pay the price to conquer your Bucephalus so that he can take you very far. And many people, they are not engaged in self-discipline and probably never will, which is, well, it's to be expected. It takes, to some extent, some hardcore self-discipline for a person to stop fearing cold water and taking cold showers. Engaged with that transition, and I realized that our brains are, for the most part, conditioned to panic with things that are not terrifying at all. We are just conditioned to view them as terrifying, and only with kind of self-kindness, by being, as in, not just starting to cold shower like a hero, but to little by little, in the first like 20 sessions, you just put a little bit of cold water on top of yourself at the start, and then shower normally. And after like a transition period, I deconditioned myself to fear cold showering. And I think the same applies to other situations in which the interpretedness word could be applied. Fear of death, fears in general, anger as well. There is very little that angers me nowadays. Stuff that would anger me to no end very, very quickly would trigger me. Just now I'm kind of equanimous to these things, and even in some situations I even find reasons to laugh about it. So I think it's it's not a thing that you can just, okay, I read it and so now I'm this person that never angers and whatnot. No, it involves self-discipline. It involves tending your mind as if it were a garden for long periods of time. Self-discipline is the stuff of you building yourself little by little, day by day, with patience that maybe is equates to Indra's patience. And also it's showcased in Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit and James Clear's Atomic Habits, that properly adapts the ancient wisdom of self-discipline to our contemporary day and age, in my estimation. So I hope I addressed your question, but I think that just to add to it, I think that since Christianity with some few exceptions of saints and whatnot, for the most part, people are not engaged with self-discipline in a way that completely banishes anger, as would happen for the school of Megara, Stilpo, the really good Stoics, the Cynics, and the Buddhists and the Taoists.
So if I can suggest something, I was reminded of a story, and it happens to be a story about a Buddhist monk. So this might illustrate the issue, because I think that the Buddhists are always about detachment. So if there's any anger or greed or lust or anything that's owning you, that's clearly what they're against. But they're also about the middle path. So the story is this. There's a Buddhist monk in a small village who was well respected as a spiritual leader, and he had come down from his house that day to go into town to do some business. Well, wait a minute, why is he doing business? Is he motivated by greed? No, he's detached, but he's doing business. He's being the holy man. And he comes across in the streets this young fanatic, this enthusiast, this young man who's grasping the snake all the time. And he says, he's shouting in the streets, we have to become spiritual. We have to care about the big things. And you're all distracted. He thinks he's bringing the great wisdom to everybody. And the young fanatic runs up to the Buddhist monk and he says, what would you do if you knew that today was your last day on earth? Or I think he even worded it as if this was the last day, that the world was coming to an end and this was the final day. What would you do differently today? What would you do if you knew that? And the Buddhist monk, in his detached way, he looked at the young man. He said, I would go into town and I would buy a donkey. And what? Why would you buy a donkey? He goes, because this morning I woke up and I decided that today I would go into town and buy a donkey. So that's what I'm going to do today. And so it's this. I think, and we could be wrong about this. We're hashing it out, but I think that what I was expressing as a view that I had thought Buddhism was about in our last session was this idea of, well, just be so detached that you don't need donkeys and you don't need food, right? That's what the Buddha does before he finds the middle way, after he leaves the village. It's like, well, what is this guy? Is he motivated by greed? Is he trying to expand his kingdom? Does he want more assets? He needs a donkey for some reason. How attached to material things is he? It's like, no, he's detached from all of them, but he's not. So abstinence and alcoholism, anorexia and morbid obesity, right? These are both extremes. None of these are the middle path. These are both extreme attitudes towards food or extreme attitudes towards alcohol. So the extreme attitude towards materialism would be, I need to have more things. I need to have more things, or I need to have nothing. I can live off the air and the sunshine and get everything away from me. Those are both too extreme. It's possible, and it's possible that I'm wrong about this, but it's possible that the attitude towards the emotion should be the same thing, which is they should never own you. You should be detached from them. But that doesn't mean that they can't play a proper role if they're a slave instead of a master. So I have no idea if that's correct, but I'm going to put that forward as a possible way of interpreting it.
I would respond to you by saying, do the wisest Buddhists and Stoics ever feel angry? Does anger come in them? Yeah, it does. But they view it more like a storm cloud that comes overhead and just passes, and this too will pass. And so they look at it as transient. They don't cling to it. Don't cling to it, and they don't let the thing feed on them by clinging too much to it, so they kind of just let
But
it
the question is there
slide.
utility to it? Like you and I think that, but the question is, could you go even further and say that there's a use for it rather than just waiting for it to pass?
I wish I could talk about that kind of like by experience, but I have no idea, because I think I'm also suspicious of this, and I think that if we stifle our kind of horse pulling the chariot, as metaphorized as our emotions, if we lack emotions, we will also lack any will. We will lack any impulse to do stuff, to buy the donkey, like the Buddhist monk was saying. So, and also Carl Jung was also of the opinion that we have a shadow, and shadows might look terrifying at first glance, but if you figure out a way to kind of make friendship with the shadow and tame it and integrate it,
is that an error?
you will be made complete. I think
so is that
it's
an error in Buddhism, or is the correct way of interpreting Buddhism what you and I are talking about? Because I don't know that it is.
I think equanimity in Buddhism is, the feelings will come, but they will go, and you won't attach to them, but you will have them all the same. And I don't know about Buddhism for this, but I know that Stoicism, as expressed very explicitly by Marcus Aurelius, was, if you feel a feeling that it comes without any warning, and it comes unplanned, and it's kind of bitter, you figure out a way to turn it into something good.
I was going to say, my approach to this has always been pretty much that feeling, emotions and feelings are like weather. They're always present. Some days are good days, some days are bad days. They come and go. The easiest one of those, at least for me to conquer, was fear, because fear is not about the present, it's about the future, and it's about the unknown, and especially about unknown pain in the future. And if you take it on just a raw factual basis, it either happens or it doesn't, and all that. That was the way that I was able to basically stare down the fear. It's like, okay, well, it happens or it doesn't. There's no reason to fear whether it happens or not. Cut out the middleman. And just wanted to share those 2 points and tag it on.
Basically, I wish I could answer your question, Nerdalliun, with knowledge of cause and whatnot, but I'm not so knowledgeable in Buddhism to say categorically that Buddhists have this approach to dealing with emotions, or that approach. I can only try to guess what that might be. Maybe in the future we can come back to this question and be more confident.
What I'd like to do is maybe very briefly share my view of emotions, and I don't know if this is aligned with Buddhist emotions, but my understanding of Buddhism, as limited as it is that it is kind of in contradiction to Buddhist understanding of things like anger and fear. So without getting too technical about it, some of the most powerful artificial intelligence algorithms work on the basis of learning from experience, estimates of the value of future states that are about to be entered. Right before you act, you make an evaluative estimate of the possible consequences of the action. And
that's utilitarian ethics, right? On the adapted.
But what they do is they simulate the unconscious process. So not utilitarian. Utilitarians ask you to do that rationally, so to formally list out the possible consequences and assign probabilities and utility values consciously. What reinforcement learning algorithms do is they kind of simulate at a very basic level the gut feel we have for, oh, this isn't good, that isn't good. Because it's not as elaborate as our conscious reasoning system. It's just to estimate good or bad in one dimension. Now, I think in people we have multiple dimensional estimation of what's going to happen. So we don't have good or bad. We have something like outrageous or scary or sad or lovely or sexy or funny or interesting. at least those, probably more. But there are different kinds of estimates of the kind of, and we can have several values. So like at the same time funny and sexy, or at the same time scary and sexy, or at the same time outrageous and scary, or any mixture of those. And those things we learn in what psychologists call conditional learning. So you can condition animals to fear certain things by associating things they unconditionally fear. They're born with instincts to fear, and you just associate them with experience. And people and animals can learn. People can learn fear conditioning as well. We can learn love conditioning. We can learn I guess lust conditioning, like most of those emotions. And so part of it is on an individual level, it helps us to act in situations where there is no time to sit and meditate for hours and come to a clear, calm space of mind to act. If a building is burning down, sometimes firemen need a split second. That room is safe to enter. That room is not safe to enter. They need to go. And they make those decisions emotionally. Like they have an embodied sense, like, that doesn't feel good. Yeah, that feels all right. They go there. And novice firefighters are rubbish at that, so they get it wrong, but they learn through experience, and their emotional responses change. Now, what a lot of these emotion hacking things do is they say never feel fear. Right? I'm sorry, if you're in some situations a firefighter and you don't feel fear, you're the one who's going to die because you stupidly weren't afraid to enter the wrong room. Like, you need the fear to guide you to not die. Like, it has a individual survival mechanism. Furthermore than that, it also has a social thing. So I think this is especially where anger shines through, because I've had the experience of trying to rationally communicate, you are violating my boundaries now. This is not okay. Stop this, please. In a lovely voice, in sort of like an emotional tone of, I still love you. This is all right. And then just getting walked over because it never registered emotionally. Oh shit, this person is actually suffering pain from what I'm doing. It's not okay for me to be doing this. They're just saying that, look, they're fine. Like, emotionally, they're fine with that. And I can be fine with some stuff for a short time, or I can take many years of practice and eventually become fine with something. But I can't do many years of practice and become fine with every little way in which people, or every way in which someone can violate my personal boundaries. Like, people will violate my boundaries in different ways. They'll do things that hurt me in different ways. I can't just be equanimous about everything. So part of what anger does is it socially signals, this is not okay, stop that. Like, you motherfucker, you stop doing this right now. That's not okay. We're not going to be okay if you continue doing this. That's part of what anger's job is. And if I'm never like that, then it becomes, are we going to have a debate about everything where something's not okay? Or is everything just going to be okay? Everything can't be okay. Sometimes someone has to die because there's not enough resources, and fights break out about the resources. Like you can't just say everything is always okay, let's do nothing about it. Sometimes things aren't okay. And I think part of anger's evolutionary purpose is for mammals to communicate with each other. This is not okay. Like, we have to, like, this is a problem that needs to be addressed right now, like, especially if it's urgent. And if you take that out of relationships, I don't think you get better relationships. I don't think you get a better society without a police force that has violence, or without an army. Like, if you just say, no, let's just all love each other, let's just kumbaya and loving kindness meditation and sing
or let's all be like Vulcans.
Yeah. So I think monks can hypocritically, sort of on the side of society, outsource their violence. So you can have a Buddhist monastery inside an empire that has a police force and has an internal police force and has a military and exercises violence in all kinds of ways, and they could be protected. And the empire can say, look how lovely we are, and look how great we are. Look at the beautiful temples we built. We're not bad people. While they murder people who violate boundaries that they said, this is the law. If you violate this law, we murder you. So you can have that kind of hypocritical, let's just loving kindness all the time in the context of an empire that protects that hypocritical loving kindness. But you can't just have an empire of loving kindness. That doesn't work. Like, we've never had, like, in human history, in millions of years of human history, I don't think we've ever had just loving kindness, no anger. And people have been preaching these practices for how long? For how many thousands of years? People have said, like, all you need to do is you need to awaken to the fact that anger is an illusion. And still, nowhere is there like a fully functional society of people who never get angry at anything. I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I'm not sure we need that to happen.
It's also really important to address your points by saying that people often think that Stoicism and Buddhism are about suppressing and rejecting emotions, and that is completely not the case. And Donald Robertson, a guy who has been studying Stoicism for many decades, and also Marcus Aurelius, and also is a trained psychologist who writes about CBT. And he says that Stoicism is not about repressing our emotions. It's not about redirecting them in a way that we just continue to figuring out ways to redirect very inflamed emotions like anger, like going to the gym and just train harder or something like that. Instead, it's about examining where those emotions come from. So probably it would boil down to two components: an external component related to stimuli, and an internal component related to beliefs. So imagine a very touchy young adult male who thinks that girls around him, they own the world to him. They owe him respect. And the first girl that says no, that rejects him, he will go apeshit over that. This is just to give a ridiculous and exaggerated example. But having said that, of course, there are situations in which anger probably is natural. It will arise just unconditionally, regardless of the beliefs or frame of mind that we have. But how we will process it, how we will react and act ourselves, if we feel anger when we are with our brother or our spouse, and they say something maybe with good intentions, but they are kind of foolish, they are unaware of our own struggles, and they give us advice without us asking or something like that, and we feel like under pressure or under stress or under duress, or we feel some injustice there, especially in a public setting with more people around us, and we kind of feel that we're being exposed. So do we feel angry or not? Probably we will tend to feel angry unless we are a god or a sage or something like that I cannot talk for, because I have no idea what that feels like. And so probably the person will feel that anger in the face of injustice, and probably they will tend to raise their tone of voice, but it will differ between a young adult who is just starting to taste the wines of endorphins, adrenaline, and whatnot, and a seasoned veteran of a 50-year-old guy who has engaged in self-discipline in one of these traditions, or maybe several. So maybe the outcome will be different. But I think in terms of psychological studies, we can only be sure of this if we have populations to study. And we don't have populations like these that I'm attempting to describe to study. If we study psychology, we will kind of have a mean population that is more like the 21st century privileged class that I was attempting to describe earlier. And if we study other people's, we will have different results. But we will tend to not have the results consistent of populations that have engaged with these kinds of self-discipline for long periods of time. And so we have no evidence to talk about what that would be like, what kind of behavior faced with circumstances that could be like. So further studies are needed, as would be written in pretty much many pieces of scientific literature, in which they are working with downsized samples because of lack of funding, and also they're starting to test things that have not been tested before. So I think there's a lot of terrain to clear here. Any other comments or words, or should we go?
I'm good to move on.
I'm good with moving on.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Sorry for the rant, but yeah,
No,
I cannot
that was
I
good.
cannot I
We-
cannot claim we
Wa-
know.
Wanting to move on was not saying that the conversation wasn't interesting. It was brilliant.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Okay, and then Adamson and Ganeri dismissed the Buddhists as interpreting Siddhartha with the no self doctrine, then said that the Buddha implicitly affirmed the Upanishadic concept of philosophy as being about path and purpose. Well, to be fair, that's the case. Not so much the case about the no self. We will see about that. So here are a few excerpts from the Dhammapada, which literally mean in Pali words of doctrine or way of the truth. They are ethically emphasized aphoristic verses, and so to read, we are what we think, all that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. We are what we think, all that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. Of course, this is not literally true. There are limit cases and exceptions and whatnot, but bear with me, this is aphoristic. This is to re-engineer one's mind. And then, if a man holds himself dear, let him watch himself carefully. During one, at least, out of the 3 watches, a wise man should be watchful. Let each man direct himself first to what is proper, then let him teach others. Thus a wise man will not suffer. If a man make himself as he teaches others to be, then being himself will be subdued. He may subdue others. One's own self is indeed difficult to subdue. Self is the lord of self. Who else could be the lord? With self well subdued, a man finds a lord such as few can find. The evil done by oneself, self-begotten, self-bred, crushes the foolish, as a diamond breaks a precious stone. He whose wickedness is very great brings himself down to that state where his enemy wishes him to be, as a creeper does with the tree which it surrounds. The best of ways is the eightfold, the best of truth, the 4 words, the best of virtues, passionlessness, the best of men, he who has eyes to see. This is the way. There is no other that leads to the purifying of intelligence. Go on this way. Everything else is the deceit of Mara, the tempter, a god that symbolizes temptation, pretty much like Satan. If you go on this way, you will make an end of pain. The way was preached by me when I had understood the removal of the thorns in the flesh. You yourself must make an effort. The Tathagatas, Buddhas, are only preachers. The thoughtful who enter the way are freed from the bondage of Mara. All created things perish. He who knows and sees this becomes passive in pain. This is the way to purity. All created things are grief and pain. He who knows and sees this becomes passive in pain. This is the way that leads to purity. And to finish, he whose conquest is not conquered again, into whose conquest no one in this world enters. By what track can you lead him? The awakened, the omniscient, the trackless. He whom no desire with its snares and poisons can lead astray. By what track can you lead him? The awakened, the omniscient, the trackless. Even the gods envy those who are awakened and not forgetful, who are given to meditation, who are wise and who delight in the repose of retirement from the world. Difficult to obtain in the conception of men, difficult is the life of mortals. Difficult is the hearing of the true law. Difficult is the birth of the awakened, the attainment of Buddhahood. Not to commit any sin, to do good, and to purify one's mind. That is the teaching of all the awakened. The awakened call patience the highest penance, long-suffering the highest nirvana, for he is not an anchorite, pravragata, who strikes others. He is not an ascetic, sramana, who insults others. To finish, not to blame, not to strike, to live restrained under the law, to be moderate in eating, to sleep and sit alone, and to dwell on the highest thoughts. This is the teaching of the awakened. And so this is a sampling of the Dhammapada, which in audiobook form is like 2 hours long or something like that, and contains many of these aphoristic verses. Of course, they are not literally true. They were not intended to tell people how the world works. They are intended rather to give people some tools to build their minds a bit stronger, or a bit more anti-fragile, or a bit more resilient than the tools that people pick up haphazardly to build their minds with whatever it is in fashion in society. And so this is a sampling of Buddhism, and feel free to disagree with this and be triggered by it, and speak your mind.
Yeah, I'm triggered. I'm just gonna put on one of the comments by Wolfie. I'm a musician. Wouldn't that be a productive passion to possess? I also wanted to make a comment about passion, so that's why I just wanted to highlight that. So me and Wolfie are both interested about the passionlessness being the highest virtue, and I think there may be something in translation, because I remember one of the terms that was for enthusiasm was considered a good thing, so being energetic and enthusiastic. But passion is considered a bad thing. So in English, those words are sometimes used interchangeably. And if one's good, both are good. If one's bad, both are bad. But apparently they had a distinction. So there are some kinds of enthusiasm or energeticness that are considered bad, and some that are considered good. The bad ones, they call passion, and the good ones, they call enthusiasm, or at least they actually use different words than passion and enthusiasm, Pali words or Sanskrit words or whatever.
I think it's about not being owned by your emotions. I think that's where the distinction emerges. If you have strong feelings about something that you hold dear, like Wolfie with his music, but he doesn't get all worked up for it, and it doesn't degrade his health by having those passions, then he really is owning his love for music, and the love for music is not owning him, like as if it were a vice. So I would say that pretty it's possible that that's where the distinction arises.
I was going to say, I interpret it as sort of passion is sort of cognate to desire, and enthusiasm is much more of being in the moment. Whatever's happening, you're kind of into the moment. And passion is like Rogério said, is much more of that desire standpoint. And the one thing reading through this is I just wonder how many smart-ass students sat there and came back with, well, if you never start, you can't lose. Tag.
Well, that would be true for mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons. But in the case of building up your mind, in my case at least, I regret deeply not having started in this journey like a decade sooner or more. Probably this regret will accompany me to the end of my days.
No reason to regret it. You started when you started. All you can do is go forward. Tag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say maybe you needed the raw material of the mistakes to have a big adventure to sort everything out. At least that's what I tell myself.
Damn it, man! Why were you fooling around for so long? Because before this, I was only looking at Buddhism, Stoicism, and the rest on a popular level, as given through social media, mass media, and etc. A strawman's version, watered down, dumbed down, mistakenly erroneous, and in foolish way of depicting these traditions. And now that I've dipped my toes in some of them, it's just it's just amazing what I've been losing all these years. So there's that. So feel free to add any comments, or otherwise we will go forward.
So maybe I can comment on that one if you want to comment on that slide. Not to blame, not to strike, to live restrained under the law, to be moderate in eating, to sleep and to sit alone, and to dwell on the highest thought. This is the teaching of the awakened. And I maybe link that to that's good and well if you can outsource your blaming and striking to a law enforcement aspect of society. But if you're the law enforcement and to say, well, we're never going to use any violence to enforce this law, we're just going to appeal to people's desire to be reincarnated in a better life or to free themselves of their own suffering, then there will be no law enforcement, and the land will be a lot less lawful than when there are people who say, like, I blame you for breaking the law, and if you do not start complying or make amends, we will forcibly punish you in some way that may or may not include striking.
This prompts me to tell the story of Lycurgus, the legendary Spartan king, who was blinded on one eye. And this story is told by Stoics like Musonius Rufus, one of the teachers in Rome. And he said that, well, Lycurgus was blinded on an eye by a youth when training, or something like that. The details of how he acquired the blindness weren't precise, but it was by error of this young, intemperate guy who probably has some attitude problems and whatnot. And the populace grabbed the guy, arrested him, and delivered the guy to Lycurgus for Lycurgus to do with him what he pleased. And what did Lycurgus do? Lycurgus took him in as a disciple, as a pupil, or as a student, taught him self-discipline, mastery, etc., did him no physical harm according to the account, and after a while, maybe months, maybe years, delivered him back to the population as an upstanding citizen. And so this is clearly an emphasis on the rehabilitative quality of justice, and in contrast to what our nature wants us to do, with all its might and all its screaming at us from inside, that we want revenge. Well, we might get revenge by blaming psychologically, or by acting really to put things into acts in terms of the vindictive form of justice. But if everyone does that, one must question that as well. If we do stuff, figure out if everyone did that, like Kant urges us to think.
This story made me think of a different ancient. I was going to let me slide this in. Made me think of a different ancient Greek philosopher, and that is Diogenes. Because in a lot of ways he fits the bill perfectly, and you could kind of say he was living the Buddhist way of life. Go ahead, Nerdalliun.
I was just going to say, like, the punishment may or may not have included striking, and I didn't suggest that everyone should be struck for every misdeed that they do. And I'm not so sure about the categorical imperative, but I'll leave a critique of the categorical imperative for another day. Yes. So rehabilitative justice is a thing, and it works in some cases. So if you treat every faltering child who makes a mistake as a hardened, sadistic, malevolent, antisocial criminal, then that would be an awful society. But on the flip side, if you treat the really hardened, sadistic criminals as if they're just faltering children, you're going to pay a price for making that mistake too. So, like, context matters, and details matter. But the thing is, there's some percentage of people who become very hardened bad actors that it's not possible to win over by kindness or reason. And I don't have a proof for that. The best I can do is just in history, like, show me the society where they've managed to go completely without violence. it doesn't even have to be many. Like 1 in 1,000 is enough to ruin a society that's 1 million people strong. So I think there's a need for some amount of violence, and people apply that violence incorrectly all the time, which itself is a kind of injustice that we need to that is outrageous. So like when police apply inappropriate force, or when people get inappropriately severe or unfairly severe sentences, or when the opportunity to rehabilitate and to educate is missed in favor of taking sort of petty retribution, that in and of itself, I think, is outrageous and a cause for desire to fix things and make things better. I'll maybe like leave the question of violence and aggression with just a quote from Aristotle. Like, anybody can get angry. That's not an achievement. We're born like with a capacity to get angry. I'm ad-libbing on Aristotle's quote here. What's not easy is to get angry at the right things in the right amounts, and to express that anger in the right way, at the right time and place, appropriately. That is very difficult, and it's an achievement. And I think like that's a for me, I think that's part of cultivating a virtuous character, is learning what is outrageous, and just how much outrage is justified, and what are the healthy sort of healthy at various levels, healthy at the individual level, the family level, the workplace level, the community level, the national level, ways to express that anger and to channel that anger into people assertively saying, no, this is a boundary we will not allow to be crossed. If people try to cross this, in spite of us making it very clear we will not allow this, there will be repercussions. And if those repercussions are unpleasant for the other person, sometimes we'll be okay with that and maybe feel the better for it because we think they deserve it.
A part of wisdom is knowing what is the correct course of action. That should be an ingredient of what is considered wisdom, if it's wisdom that is worth its salt. And so if the injustice is at this level, like with children doing tantrums, the means should be at the same level, should match the level, the means of recovering justice, in a sense. But if the injustice is overwhelming, the means should also match, not too much, not too little, not too few, as Aristotle would pat us on the back for thinking that. And so the situations must be also analyzed by themselves. And I wish we had a huge stock of very wise people, wise counsels everywhere to figure things out, so that we, on one hand, wouldn't need so many laws, and on the other hand, we had a more straightforward and expedient justice system to either meet things with emphasis on rehabilitation, or remove very, very malicious, sadistic people from society as quickly as possible to protect people, basically. So these things require wisdom in huge amounts, if it were quantifiable. So I agree with pretty much everything you said, and I'm just trying to add to that. Graham and Zara.
No, I'm
Do you
just
want
listening to you
more
guys
slides?
going back and forth and agreeing. Let's go on.
Okay. So this was one of the questions raised in the podcast. Is it justifiable to lie for a good purpose? They even gave the example of children in a house in flames. And so should we kind of confuse the children by explaining the house is in flames, a thing that is foreign to them? They will take a bit to understand what that is. Or instead, should you tell them something relatable? Arguably a lie, by saying, quickly go outside, there are toys there, which would be a thing that would motivate them really quickly, like kids just trudging down very quickly down the stairs to open their Christmas presents or something like that. So are we committing a lie, in the light of Buddhism? Would it be justifiable? So this was a question posed there, and I thought it was a really interesting question that also mirrors other thinkers like Kant
Okay.
that I just mentioned. But yeah, I'll shut up and let you guys.
No. This is an interesting discussion because I realize where it's going to lead us is. So one of the things you talked about earlier was this idea that one has to live the teachings, not agree with them, right? So is the Buddhist enlightened teacher always talking to us like we're children? In other words, you don't grasp the teaching, you use it to get somewhere proper, right? It's using it as a boat. I think this is what this ends up boiling down to. So for instance, I think you'd be better lying to the child by saying there's a monster in the house, because that's going to definitely motivate them to leave. And also, that's not exactly a lie, right? If you're trying to communicate to a child who doesn't understand what fire is, you're accurately communicating the truth when you say there's a monster in the house, we have to get outside. It can't get us outside. Get outside right now. That's actually the truth. It's the most truth you can express to the child, and it gives them the right information. It doesn't just lead them to do the right thing. So it's not a noble lie where it says, here's something that's not true, but it'll make you act the right way. That's actually the truth. And what's cool about this idea is I think that it helps to illustrate this idea that the teachings that are given to us by the enlightened ones in this path, we're told that they're there to get us to move and to be able to move in the right direction, but grasping them and thinking that the truth is within the propositions that are given is a mistake, because we're like the children that need to get this truth we can't exactly understand. If we already understood it, we'd already be enlightened, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I didn't even think about using the example of the house in flames as our life, our normal life, and this noble lie as the teachings, and getting outside as becoming enlightened. But yeah, kudos on you to make the connection.
I was going to say, I got 2 quick points. One is, I'm pretty sure that Plato would not only say, is it justifiable? He would say it's necessary.
And lie with style, Make a beautiful lie.
Exactly.
Yeah, we know thought he was telling the truth.
Mythologize the crap out of the lie. Yeah. But then we would have Immanuel Kant in the corner, wincing and contracting his lips there in stern disagreement.
Well, because no.
Guy.
I think I can universalize the maxim, or the motivation behind the maxim behind that lie there. I think there's nothing wrong with universalizing it. That passes the categorical test. Tell the child there's a monster in the house to get them out of the house is something you could universalize and still be okay with. Well,
I'm going to chime in. Yeah, I really think that's a bad example, because there's no need to lie. That's a great example of a place where if you're afraid enough and you tell them, get the hell out of the house, like with enough emotion in your voice, they won't ask for why. They'll understand. Oh, fuck, get out of the house. Yeah, okay, yeah, let's go. So emotion really allows for, like, in those situations where you need to act quickly, for crucial evaluative information to be communicated really fast, and you don't even have to put you don't have to do nonviolent communication. So when I see the smoke coming out of the house, I feel, you don't have to do that. You can just yell at your children and they'll get the point. I think for me, when it comes to like the ethics of lying, I consider it similar to the ethics of violence. I think generally both violence and lying are sort of aggressive acts that should be minimized. And the reason, well, like a kind of violence, and the thing lies do is they undermine trust in relationships, which is a kind of violence. And it can be violence on many levels. Maybe violence isn't the best word for that, but it does damage to relationships in a way that can lead to tangible negative consequences. And similarly, like physical forms of violence causes damage, then it should most of the time be avoided. Now, there are contexts like, say, a jiu-jitsu dojo, martial arts dojo, where we come together with the understanding we're going to practice our violence on each other, and that's a little different. We are doing things that, in different contexts, if I did those same things to a person who didn't understand we're practicing these things, it would be considered very inappropriate and like wrong of me to randomly choke out a stranger. And similarly for lying, there are some dojos like improv comedy, where the understanding is we're pretending and we're practicing sort of making stuff up, and we're like in an improv class, like everybody's telling lies all of the time, and hopefully they're funny and hopefully it's conducive to some kind of
acting
developing.
schools, acting schools, the master liars of all. Yeah, so I think you added an ingredient there, a very important ingredient: consent.
Yeah, so consent is a very important ingredient, and then like also with violence, like there's some justifiable violence where it's harmful and it's non-consensual, and we're just like, no, I'm within my right to protect. I have a duty to protect this boundary with violence. And in the case of some kinds of violent confrontation with a hostile person, there is no trust. Like by default, the assumption is there is no trust in that relationship. And so what can happen is you can use deceit in hostile interactions like war, deception, to advantage over your enemy. And so I think if you're fighting a war with someone, you're throwing bombs at them, using deception also is not really the moral, because I should never lie because lying can't say it's never okay to lie. No, if you're fighting a war, you deceive your enemy about where your units are to save their lives so that they bomb the wrong locations. Of course you deceive your enemy. And yeah, in improv comedy classes we playfully deceive each other the way we playfully choke each other in a jiu-jitsu class, and that's okay too. But yeah, like a house that's on fire and the kids want an explanation for why the hell we need to get out, you just yell at them. Like, you pick them up.
No, that's right.
Out.
I thought about that laughably. Go ahead.
I had this situation, but not with a house in fire, but with a snake in my yard, and my kid was like 2 years old. And I shouted at him. He instead froze. And what did I do? I just ran to him as quickly as possible, and picked him up, because he did the opposite of what I wanted him to do. He froze. So I'm guessing that if there's a chance that the kids will freeze if you yell at them. Some kids will do that. So.
As a parent, you always have to factor in that your kid, there's a chance they're always going to do the opposite of what you want them to do. And
yeah.
No,
even
I was
if
you
lie to them, or if you're honest to them.
Yeah, either way.
Just step on that snake, just that huge 2 meter long snake that's there. That probably it's not no big deal. It's not poisonous. We live in Portugal, not in India. But get over here, just in case.
Go get your new pet snake, kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't consider actors the master liars. I consider politicians the master liars, since they were doing it longer. And the last one, Nerdalliun, is I couldn't help but flash to a scene of Marshall Rosenberg sitting down with his kids and saying, "Now, children, we have a need to exit our domicile as quickly as possible."
Let me explain heat and energy transfer to you.
Yeah, you could also go the thermodynamics route.
Matter and energy relate to each other according to this formula. And what happens is burning is an oxygenation of, the house is gone.
Yada. Yeah, but probably kind of like a technique or a tactic of influence that is most likely to influence these young humans to do the thing really expediently, because their glandular system pumps them with adrenaline and all, would be justifiable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to lie to them. I think the example of saying monster would be a good one. But for a different example, that's way more, it still haunts me till this day, of lying, not lying, that I still can't figure out, and I will just lie, is you have a bunch of you're in a situation in which the Nazis are occupying. You have a bunch of Jewish families under your cellar, and these Nazi SS guys beat at your knock at your door and ask you if you are harboring any Jewish people. So what do you do?
Yeah, laughably, that example and the lying in war example wouldn't pass Kant's categorical imperative test. He would say you have to tell the truth because you can't will that the maxim be universalized, that what motivated your maxim be universalized. So they would know you're lying, because if it was universalized, nobody would believe you anyway, and so the lie wouldn't work. I think there's probably something wrong with Kant's ethics there.
I was going to say that's a good one, Rogério. It goes through the your honest person is going to lie and say that they're that they're not harboring any Jews, and on the other extreme you have Bill Clinton, who's going to have the mental reservation of, well, they all could have converted to Christianity in the 20 minutes since the last time I saw him.
There you go.
So since I don't know for certain, I can sit there and say, to the best of my knowledge, no Jews here.
It depends on what Jews means.
Exactly.
Oh, that's Jordan Peterson. Like, we have to get really deep into the detail of what exactly do you mean by Jew? You know, like there were very many different traditions that were, like in the Middle East a long time ago, and Levites and all.
It depends on what the definition of floorboards is. So I want to underline how right what Nerdalliun said earlier is, I think 90% of what you need to communicate to the child is communicated by mom's afraid. The fact that mom's afraid is 90% of what they need to know. And she might not need to say anything so long as she's running out the door and saying, come quickly or something like that. But you're right. Kids are curious things, and maybe saying there's a monster in the house would be pretty much the most true thing you could say. That's what's weird about what I'm trying to say here, is that the most true thing you could say is not anything that takes more than 2 sentences, because that's saying the lie that it's okay to sit here and talk right now, right? The most true thing you could say to the child is, there's a monster, we have to get outside. So I don't know, maybe I'm saying that's not a lie in that case, which sort of might ruin the whole point of the ethical thought experiment. Right.
Yeah.
But the kids will be more prepared to run with mommy if running away with mommy was a game, and the kids would be sort of, I think, more prepared if what they need to do now is to just keep quiet and bear with the discomfort. If sort of just keeping quiet was a game, like there are some kinds of responses that you can work into games and play with your children.
Interesting.
And they can get to know the game, and you can just like, well, today it's maybe not going to be a lot of fun, but you remember that game, we play that game now.
You basically show the importance of doing fire drills or snake drills.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we need to trigger behaviors with that are like really fast to execute, conditioning is really the tool to go. Yeah, and someone who is confronted with an emergency, whatever it is, for the first time in their life, without any drills, even if it's an adult person, they will just stand there like a dodo facing these hungry sailors with knives and guns and whatnot. So yeah, I think drilling and stuff, preparedness is super important. Shall we move on? We will basically kill the Buddha for now, and
Wolf just said the same thing. Preparedness would help. Yeah, let's go ahead.
So according to my perspective, the Buddha didn't attain immortality. In fact, he died at 80-something years old by having consumed some bad mushrooms that he ate at a very poor person's house, who eagerly invited the Buddha, and supposedly the Buddha even knew that this was his way out, basically, or way to log off from this supposed video game as my interpretation of the Pali Canon, at least from what I read of it, is. So he didn't become immortal. He just logged off from this game for good. We only have the whispers and hearsay and texts written after the fact of his life. So we can only at best, without a time machine, guess what his life looked like and what his lectures were like. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, I guess it depends how you can conceptualize these things, but I do think there's a sense in which the Buddha may have become a bigger god than Indra, to the degree that he's sort of credited with wisdom that he never spoke in his lifetime, and he's remembered by more people. He's like more famous than Indra. He's worshipped by more people than Indra is. So, like as an object of worship, I think the Buddha became a bigger god than Indra is.
Yeah, exactly. If the KD, the key performance indicator of is he a bigger god than Indra is the amount of people worshipping him, without a doubt. Yeah, he's a bigger god than Indra now. But then again, I don't view Siddhartha as a god. I just see him like Aristotle or Socrates or any other, especially the guys that didn't leave writings, like Socrates.
Yeah, I think he's from the Greek philosophers maybe more similar to Pythagoras in that almost everything we know about him is only indirectly from his cult of followers. Sometimes writing hundreds of years after he was dead. Actually, all of the writings we have are no less than several hundred years after he died.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think for Pythagoras, there may be a fragment here or there that's a little closer to his life, but also a vast majority of anything written about Pythagoras was written by people hundreds of years after he died.
He may not have existed at all, but it's possible.
One of my
So here's the
favorite
question.
stories is, I was going to say,
Go
one of
ahead.
my favorite stories is how one of the instructions the Buddha gave his Sagana is do not write down his words. So technically, if that one's true, nothing else should be written down. So everything that we hear from the Buddha is actually not really from the Buddha, or at least against his directives, which I find kind of interesting.
Wow.
Go ahead, Zara.
No, that's now you got me thinking. That's pretty wild. So I'm going to maintain my reputation I'm trying to build for desiring to move towards the questions that are most problematic for us as philosophers and say, well, wait a minute. If there are people relating to the Buddha for centuries, well, then he achieved a kind of immortality, right? Like, in what ways did he achieve immortality that we can at least affirm? Well, there are people who are not saying that they ascribe to his teachings, but are in relationship with him. Well, so to what degree does that mean that his spirit lives on, at least? Something like that? Is that not an interesting thing to argue against?
Sorry,
No, that's
I'm
interesting.
replying
I could be
to
more
Wolfie at the
provocative.
moment.
Oh, okay.
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
interesting. That's very similar to like Gilgamesh in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as to how he attained his immortality after it all through the walls that he built for the city of Ur. Tag.
So wait, I want to clarify something. Rogério, you said that the Buddha died in the 2nd or 3rd century, and so he didn't achieve immortality.
No. This 2nd or 3rd century is the date of the relief. This relief here.
Of this relief.
This
Okay.
art piece.
Okay. Sorry. In any case, you said he had a physical death.
Yeah.
Because he ate mushrooms by not wanting to be rude or choosing to go
exactly.
down his detached path of having a meal at this.
He wanted to be a good guest, and he did the full guest experience, and was kind to the poor man who for so many years invited Siddhartha, and he both visited kings and also poor people. Maybe he was even more eager to visit poor people because they didn't perhaps have some character issues. And that's the account. So
Fine.
that's the account.
So the question I'm asking is, there's different ways of talking about immortality. There's people that they talk about transcending to the heavens and they never have a physical death. And then there are people who say, well, Christ lives on and he's immortal and a new body, but in order to get there, he had to die. So is what you're saying is that the proof that he had a physical death, the proof that he didn't achieve the immortality that he was aiming at?
Well, at least not the woo-woo supernatural spiritual immortality, since we cannot prove that there is life after death in the heavenly abode of the gods kind of way, Elysium kind of way. We have no evidence either for or against that. So
right. So as philosophers, shouldn't we reserve judgment and say, I have no reason to believe he achieved immortality, and I don't know that he didn't. I know that's what he was aimed at, and you know what I mean? Like, why would we express that because we can't prove there's such a thing that we know it isn't true? I know that I'm trying to probe into things that are uncomfortable, and I'm conscious of the fact that I'm doing that.
All right. Shall I try to give a cognitive scientific perspective on how souls may survive bodily deaths? Actually, I think I'm going to give a spin that's quite close to how what's his name? Damn it, man. Plins. No, that's his tag on Twitter. Joscha Bach says it, but I also saw a similar kind of take on it by Shimon Edelman, who wrote a really neat book called Computing the Mind. And it rests on the conceptualization of selves as patterns of information, the way, say, operating systems on a piece of computer is a pattern of information. And information is kind of a spiritual thing if you start thinking about it. And it's spiritual in the sense that you can have the same information encoded in different physical media. So there's a conceptual distinction between the media that records information and the information that's recorded. That's sort of similar to the idea of Plato's forms. Like the forms are like at least conceptually separate from the physical instantiations of them in the world. And from a scientific point of view, it makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of use in abstracting information and computational models away from the physical systems that compute with the information or represent the information. So theoretical computer science and programming, whatever, represent computational constructs in abstract sort of spiritual terms, really. And there are people who model psychological phenomena as computational phenomena. So they have these computational systems, and they say, like, part of your personality is a pattern in which this computational system runs. And it depends how you define things and how you conceive of things, but there are ways of conceiving of minds that it would make sense to transfer a human mind to some sort of computational device. And if that could make sense, it should be even a lot easier to transfer a human mind from one human body to another human body. Like, at least the hardware is a lot more similar.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there's a large amount of that happens. It's imperfect and it's very noisy, but you can sort of see glimmers of your family in the mirror if you look hard, or in your siblings. If you look hard, you can see your grandma smile, and you can hear your grandpa's favorite saying at dinner or whatever. And sometimes it's a little spooky the way like those things happen. It's like they're in the room with you, even people who have long been dead. And those things do reverberate through cultures, through subcultures. So people will not only remind you of your grandma, and your siblings will not only remind you of things you heard your grandma say or your grandfather say. They can also just in little brief moments be the spitting image, or the apparition of a very famous celebrity that you've all seen a million movies of. So
and friendship.
And in friendship, yes.
And
so
in friendship.
People imitate each other in very deep ways. And No, I think especially in communities
Done.
that are like really committed to trying their best to imitate as fully as they can their spiritual leaders, I think they can end up imitating the same personality over generations fairly well. Maybe not perfectly, but like even in one human's lifetime, our personality in 10 years from now isn't going to be the same as it is today, or 10 years back, it's not exactly the same, but there's a sense in which we're the same person. I think Joscha Bach has made the argument that the Dalai Lama has been the same person for 1,000 years.
Right. So Rogério, so the question might come down to what do you mean by a person? Can a person be immortal? Well, what do you mean by? Well, we'll do the Jordan Peterson. It depends on what you mean by person.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by self.
If there's 2 billion people trying to emulate and be like the Buddha and have his personality and way of being in the world affect their way of being in the world, then there's at least in the aggregate at least one Buddha that's still alive ever since he died. And maybe many, you know what I'm saying? Like, if what you mean by what I am is this physical thing in this location, then yeah, the physical thing died. But when most of the physical things die, you don't go on replicating the pattern of your way of being in the world. So I'm not saying that that's all that's meant by immortality, but that's a heck of a long way to get there. That's been spelled out here that is totally not in contradiction with anything scientific.
So I will quote 2 guys from ancient Greece. Pericles says that your legacy is not what is left written in stone or as in the form of stone monuments. It is what is woven into the lives of others from your actions. While Plutarch amusingly says, I don't want anyone to imitate me. My shadow can do that much better than others. So I
remember Nietzsche, Zarathustra, complaining about how badly his shadow imitated him. All right.
Yeah, but I can agree that it's very plausible the position that you expressed quite eloquently, Nerdalliun. And I think it's boils down to connections and chains of consequences. Arguably, Siddhartha created a ton of chains of consequences above average of any human being. There are people doing things and thinking things nowadays that trace back to whatever he lived, did, said, or spoke, or whatnot. And so there's possibly something there to examine philosophically more intensely. As we've mentioned, connections between family members or units in an army are not visible, but arguably they are there, and we can study them metaphysically.
Okay, so let's say that 99% of what you might want to mean by immortal, and we can have that conversation, go deeper into that'd be worth having. But the real question for us as philosophers or as people trying to approach philosophy is, what do we make about these claims that seem like they're unfounded? They're mystical, they're mythological, they're spiritual, they don't seem to go in line with what we think we understand of the world. I have a quick story to tell on that, which is this, because I think this is the proper attitude for us to have as philosophers, if we want to take on the role of being philosophers and then approaching people who are doing philosophy, but also talking about these spiritual things. Here's the story that illustrates it. Again, Paul in the New Testament, God, I really don't want to go into how much I don't like Paul because it's too much, and he's probably doesn't deserve my dislike. But there's a great story where Paul goes to the Athenians, he goes to the forum, and he sees all the statues of the gods and all of this, you know the story. And they invite him in, and he preaches to them Christ crucified. He preaches to them his mysticism and his story of this is how you can reach immortality and salvation and everything. So he tells them his view of the world, and he does it in a very clever rhetorical way by saying, oh, I noticed you had a statue to the unknown God. Let me tell you about that God. And so whatever. So that's the story. And then this is Paul's own account of the story. It's the Bible's account of the story, is that there were 3 responses in the forum to what Paul said. The first group believed him. They said, oh, you've got all the truth. You own the truth. You've got the answer. We agree. We're going to go follow you now. The second group mocked him. They said, oh, that doesn't fit in with our metaphysics and how we understand the world works. What a crazy lunatic. You're a silly guy. Get out of here. And then the third group said, you should come back tomorrow. We have more questions. This is interesting what you're talking about. To me, the third group are the real philosophers. There's a mistake in philosophy which says, I think, well, if that's spiritual and weird, we already know that's not true. No, you don't. If you're a Socratic philosopher, you don't think you own the truth. Now, what's crazy about the story is that Paul says, I'm not coming back tomorrow. I'm not interested in an ongoing conversation that gets more refined, where we sophisticate our views and we get closer to the truth. I already own the truth. I already told you what it was. I've got stuff to do. So Paul excused himself from the conversation by not wanting to continue having it. The first group of philosophers, they weren't, I don't know, maybe they understood he was right. I can't say that they're definitely wrong, but they certainly weren't trying to do philosophy and say, they were saying, now I own the truth. You owned it. Now I own it. Let's go be a team and let's go follow Paul. The second group basically said, I know for sure you're wrong, even though that's not the attitude of someone who says, I'm trying to get to the truth through good conversation with people that I respect and refine my views. They just mocked him and kicked him out. It's, to me, what excuses Paul and the spiritualism from the conversation is only when he doesn't want to be there anymore, because he has this attitude of owning the truth. Whereas the true philosophers are that third group that say, hey, we'll consider that. That could be true. I don't know if it's possible to be immortal, and I don't know how one could be immortal, but maybe you're right. Let's ask some questions. Can you answer this? Clarify. When you said this, what do you mean? They wanted to keep the conversation going. And I think I'll submit the idea that that's the correct approach for us to have, is to not say, I know it's not true, and to not say, it is true and I don't have to think about it anymore. Philosophers think that others might have more truth than they have, and they have questions about it.
That's also detachment applied to intellectual pursuits. They neither grasped the conclusion that he was right, neither grasped the conclusion that he was wrong. They knew that the situation was not a situation to hang on hard to any firm position.
We're lovers of the truth. We're not trying to own her. We're not dominators of the truth. We're not slaves of the truth. We're lovers of it. We're trying to pursue it and get closer to it all the time. And we don't want that dance to end.
Yeah, and she relates to a lot of people. We must respect that.
Now, Paul has
she might favor.
Paul has a huge number of issues. Personally, I have to give him a lot of props, because to me, he's the all-time historical champion when it comes to franchising and branding. The way he was able to brand Christianity and then franchise it in little churches across the Roman Empire, I don't think you can find a better example.
I have too many bad things to say about Paul. I choose not to engage in the conversation because I think I must be unfair about him.
You're conscious.
Paul had problems with himself. It's fair. Paul had problems with himself. Yeah. I'm not defending Paul. I got issues with him too. Just saying, when it comes to franchising and branding, he's got his good points. Tag.
Let's check out on Chanakya or Kautilya and Ashoka. Shall we? Okay.
Absolutely. Ashoka did the branding for Buddha. Tag.
Yeah, exactly. But he also, to be fair, he had an empire and all its resources as well. So let's see this. So firstly, we will talk about this really interesting, unusual guy that was born in a fairly ancient Indian polymath, teacher, author, strategist, philosopher, economist, jurist, and royal advisor. So a man of many trades and many talents. Born, as I was about to mention, in a poor Brahmanic society. So a few anecdotes of his life that I found amusing to relieve us from this tension. So he wasn't by no means a fair-looking bloke. So he was being mocked during almost his entire life, especially before he started to be chums with with Chandragupta, and he trained Chandragupta for 7 rigorous years of military training, and probably also character development and spiritual development, and severe asceticism and whatnot, to make him into, for one, a killing machine to kill King Dhanananda, and another to rule mightily over most of the Indian subcontinent. And we think that he wrote the what we call the Artha Shastra. So there's that. He's the most visible piece of literature from the Indian subcontinent that is very pragmatic, very practical. It's pretty much about advising Chandragupta to rule effectively. And even if it involves doing some underhand tactics. And so he was quite a badass, according to the stories. So I would try to put him in a nutshell as kind of like a Sun Tzu, Aristotelian, Machiavellian, Da Vincian individual, to sum it all up. Before most of them, except Sun Tzu. And so Chanakya's Arthashastra. So it is a quite extensive text. And to give you guys an idea, I put here the titles of the chapters. So it had things about removal of thorns. So probably people who are in the council or the court who are becoming a nuisance or something like that. There's the how to deal with war, secret means involving spying and whatnot. So that's why I kind of thought this guy is kind of similar to Sun Tzu also, and similar to Machiavelli, because he wrote a treatise for a prince or a king or a ruler or whatnot. And Aristotelian, because he likes to look at things in several parts of this treatise from different points of view of his peers and rivals and whatnot. So a bit of that there. And since he was a polymath with so many skills, so Da Vinci as well, or a kind of a Renaissance guy before Renaissance. And so he had a way of bringing things down to the elements of it. So he used the technical term prakriti, original or primary substance or element, and his treatise had the 7 elements of a well-run state. So the ruler himself, of course, officials, the ruled territory, the fortifications, the treasury, the Allied States, and last but not least, the danda or stick, which involved guards, army, state punishments. So the people that actually do the heavy work of enforcing laws and doing brunt work and doing stuff that's displeasant and whatnot. So there's that. So up to this point, I will give you guys space to add to what I've said. By no means I was thorough and complete with this guy as I was with Buddhism. So feel free to add to what I said or disagree.
Yeah, just one thing I remember Adamson then talking about the Ashtra Satra. What's that book's name?
Artha Shastra.
Artha Shastra. There you go. Was that it seems to have been written by several people, so maybe he wrote something like a first draft that then got edited over generations. Actually, that seems to be like a common theme with Indian early literature of at least the time period here. Like people tend to give an author credit for several generations of writers worth of work. But yeah, there are I can't remember exactly what they said that makes it really seem, if there were stylistic elements or like contradictory things, that made it seem like there were some edits done at later times.
Yeah, I think I remember that as well. Yes, the style of writing just changed so dramatically that philologists just, I'm sure it wasn't the same person.
Yeah, so it's interesting to keep in mind. Also, it's like really interesting to see like a political treatise as well. Like, so for most of the time we've been talking, it's been quite inwardly focused, with the Brahmanical cast talking about things. So like things like warfare and governance and courtiership and like that kind of thing is an interesting addition to the topics. I guess we have actually looked a little bit at war with like the Bhagavad Gita and all that. But even there was like a personal experience of someone conflicted about having to kill family members on the other side, and so this is like a more practical aspect of that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm fairly new to Chanakya and don't know much about him, but the one line that caught my eye on your little summary of him is that he walked around with an anger in his eye. And I thought, yeah, that's my guy. That's good. The Buddha with his half-closed stones and his stupid smile. Give me that. give me the angry guy. I can relate
Finally,
to that
we got some passion back.
Yes. That I thought it was brilliant to talk about them in the same session. This guy helps temper the first part.
Yeah, I was going to say his lifetime exactly overlapped with Aristotle.
Yeah.
And he very much, his breadth of knowledge seemed to very much kind of pattern what Aristotle did over there. One of the things that jumps out to me with these illustrations is one of the points that the king was making fun of him was his dark skin.
Yeah. To go back to the
Brahmin. And it sounds much more like he was more from the southern Indian, more of the dark-skinned southern Indian.
Yeah, but here it shows that he was born where today is Pakistan. But there are conflicting accounts of where he was born as well. There is another one where he probably was born more to the south. But I chose one.
Yeah, Pakistan and around Aristotle's time are interesting observations, because Pakistan is around the area that Alexander made it to.
Yep.
And also Alexander made it around Aristotle's time. So it may have been influenced by knowledge of this great polymath in a foreign language. Even if you didn't know a bunch about Aristotle, if you just knew, oh, there's this great teacher who wrote on everything, he was like, yeah, I also know everything. Whatever else.
What the hell? Big deal. Yeah, probably.
I was going to say, did my other comment come across about his skin color? Because that was one that it... Okay, yeah. Okay, just wanted to make sure I know that my internet had a blip there. So
yeah.
I think what you maybe missed is Rogério observed that he was born in Pakistan, not the south of India.
Where it's called now Taxila, basically.
Okay. Are they normally darker skinned there?
Well,
ethnic wise? I was just curious.
I have no idea. I've never been. No idea.
Skin color is a sensitive topic, Graham.
Well, I understand that. That's why it jumped out at me is that the king was making fun of his dark skin. That's why it jumped out at me.
And not just that. Not just that. His broken teeth, crooked legs, whatnot.
Guys, my battery's gonna die, unfortunately.
Oh no.
Let's go on.
Should we do a part 2 to wrap it up sometime?
I don't know. You guys are welcome to carry on without me. My power went off.
I was going to say,
a while ago.
I have church coming up here, so if we hit a good wrap time, we can just pick up from here next time.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Maybe review some of the stuff at the start of next session.
Yeah, let's start with this guy right here and move on from there. That sounds brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And we will go to Ashoka and in all its glory in the next session. Okay.
Hey, nice being here with y'all.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Always
Thanks.
good.
Okay, who's still here? So I don't know if you can hear me, but Wolf made a comment about joining the after party. I don't know if he joined. I don't have the ability to add him in because I'm not the original host.
I don't either.
Okay, so it seems like it's just the two of us, and it doesn't look like he found his way in here. I don't know what that other avatar is up there, but
Don't
let me
know.
see.
It can be a ghost or something. I have no idea.
Let me see if I can get Rogério to join back in, and then we'll find out if it's just his or not.
I was going to say, I do need to get to church here coming up here. So I
Yeah.
actually, even though I'm not a Christian, I actually go to church. I'm friends with the bishops and all.
Fantastic. Hey, well, we'll say goodbye. And hey, it was great talking with you. I hope that worked out well for you and there weren't any misunderstandings. That was a good talk as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, no, it's all good. No,
Excellent. Good.
No, it's one of those. I try not to be doctrinal as far as what they actually believed. I just tried to explain my take and my understandings as I've explored the territory myself. So
No, I think it was beautiful. Yeah, I think it was really good.
It's like I can't speak for what what Buddhists thought 1,000 years ago or even today.
Oh, he's telling us we're still live, which means, oh, you know what? I know what that means. Let me. It says we're still live. Holy cow! We're not supposed to be. Hey, Wolf, thanks for letting us know. I don't know how to end it, so let's see what happens when we leave.
I think if we both leave, it ends. So yeah. So, sorry for the extra going forward. Catch you later, people. Have a good one. Bye-bye.